find the probability of our random event or a simple probability. So experimental probability is very common to use in interpreting data, since it's the same when we are gathering data. When we are having experimental probability, we need to list down the result of every experiment that we have for an event or a simple event that we have. So for example, we're going to have an experiment regarding with a toast bread. So here in the discovery education, we're going to predict the probability with the experiment that we have for the bread. So many people believe that if you drop a piece of bread, buttered toast bread, it will always land butter side down. So according to a myth, once we throw the bread with a butter, it will always land, or the face of the bread that will land on the ground is the one that has butter. It's according to a myth. So we're going to investigate if that myth is true or not. But before we proceed with that experiment, let's try to guess what will be the probability once we throw the bread that has butter. So suppose a butter piece of toast were dropped to the ground. What do you think the probability is that a piece of toast will land battered side down? Yes, Paulo.
That was a mistake.
That was a mistake. Oh, I'm not mistakenly call your name. So, Paulo, what do you think is the probability once we throw the bread that has butter? Ano ang maglaland? Is it the buttered face of the bread ang maglaland sa ground, or a face of a bread that doesn't have butter? Yes, Paulo. What do you think will be the probability?
It's 50-50.
Yes, Paulo, again. Di ba dalawa lang naman ang face ng bread, Paulo? Ng slice.
Yeah,
Nakakita
it's
ka naman yata
50-50.
ng sliced bread. I think you already saw a sliced bread. Tama ako, Paulo?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, Paulo, what will be the probability?
50%.
50%. 50% according to Paulo. So we will be having a 50% chance that once we throw the bread that has butter, it will land with a butter face. Sige, let's try. Let's investigate kung tama si Paulo sa kanyang guess for that probability. So we're going to have two experiments. One in the laboratory and one at the balcony. So let's start the experiment at the laboratory. So a drop toast experiment. So a group of friends are talking about how toast always seems to land butter side down. They decided to test the idea with an experiment. For the experiment, the toast must start in an upright and level position, and it must be dropped in the same way every time. To make sure this happens, the friends create a device that holds the toes in position and then lets it go. A person does not touch the toes at all, so no one can influence the direction of the fall. So the group of friends created a device that will hold the bread and will let it go that will land to the ground. Okay, with the same high level of place from the laboratory. The next step is to do a control test with 28 pieces. So we are going to use 28 pieces of unbuttered toast. They drop and dry the dry toast and record how each pieces lands. The friends complete the control test. What do you think the results are for the 28 pieces of toast? So the first experiment that they created, wala munang butter. Both side of the bread doesn't have a butter. Okay. They just put a letter U symbol for one side of the bread para makita ang kaibahan ng kung anong face ang nagland sa ground once the device let go the bread. So both face wala munang butter. Just mark the other face of the bread with letter U. Okay. So let's see the result of that experiment in the laboratory. So ito ang naging result for the unbuttered bread. Okay, so here's the result for the unbuttered bread. There are 13 pieces of bread that land with a letter U marked on the ground. So from 28 pieces of bread, merong 13 na sliced bread with a letter U mark that land on the ground. While there are 15 pieces of bread that land on the ground without a U mark side. Okay, so that's the result for unbuttered bread. So let's see what will be the experiment for a buttered bread. So they're done with the unbutter. The friends toast 28 pieces of bread and smear a pot of butter on each. Each pot is the same size. The friends use the device to drop each piece of battered toast and then they record the result. So they are done with the experiment kung saan walang nakalagay na butter on both sides of the bread. And they did the same experiment using the same device, but the other side of the bread has a butter. So here is the result from the laboratory experiment, yung may butter na. Okay. The result in throwing the bread that has butter is equal to 14 pieces. While there are also 14 pieces that the bread landed without a butter. So we have the same number of bread that lands with butter and a bread that doesn't have a butter. For experimental probability, we have the formula which is the same with the simple probability, which is experimental is equal to the number of favorable outcome over to the total number of outcome. That is our formula for the experimental probability. Number of favorable outcomes over the total number of outcome. Let's try to answer some of the question here in the Discover Education based on the result of the laboratory experiment for the unbuttered bread and for a buttered bread. Okay na? Can I clear the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the result. Think back to the result from the lab experiment. How likely is it that a piece of toast will land butter side? So based from the result from the laboratory experiment, what is the probability that the bread landed with a butter side? Kalimutan nyo na yung result for the butter. Sige, tingnan natin ulit si result ni butter side. It's the result of the experiment from the laboratory with a butter side and without a butter. So there are 14 pieces that land with a butter and 14 pieces that land without a butter. So let's go back to the question. What is the probability that the piece of bread, once we throw it, it will land with a butter side? According to the result that we have. What's the probability? What is the experimental probability from the experiment of throwing the butter bread? Ilan yung result sa laboratory experiment na nagland with butter? Ilan yung result sa data? Anyone? Nakita nyo ba yung result? Tingnan natin ulit ha. Ito yung result. Isa pa. I-assign ko to sa inyo. Kayo na ang sasagot. I will not explain. Now, what is the probability that it will land with a butter side?
14.
So we have the experimental probability from the result from the laboratory with 14 over 28 or 50%, which is the same from what have Paulo has answered a while ago regarding once we throw the bread, if it's going to land with a butter on one side and without a butter on the other side. So, yan yung unang experiment. But what if we're going to throw the bread at the balcony at a high level of place? So, kung kanina, si bread nasa lower level lang, which is in the laboratory, but what if we're going to throw the bread on the second floor of the balcony, at the balcony from the second floor? So, in order to validate test result from an experiment, scientists often repeat the process under different circumstances. The friends decided to take the experiment to a higher level, the second floor of the apartment building, where they dropped toast from a balcony. They ran the control test with 54 pieces of unbuttered toast like before. So the same process, the only thing that changed is the place and the level of height of the experiment, wherein we're going to have the experiment at the second floor. So they use the same experiment. Una, wala munang butter, doesn't have a butter on both sides, which is the result from the balcony control or the balcony test. This is the result. Okay, they mark one side with letter U and the other side doesn't have a mark. We have 29 pieces that landed with a letter U mark and 25 pieces without a letter U mark. The same without butter. The only thing that different is the mark that we have from the bread. And they also made the same experiment wherein they put a butter on one side of the bread, throwing it at the balcony. The result from that experiment is this one, wherein 32 pieces landed with a butter side and 22 pieces landed without a butter. So, meron 32 and 22. 32, merong butter. 22 yung wala. So, looking at the result of the second experiment that we have, how does the ratio of marked side to unmarked side from the balcony compare to the initial test in the lab? Diba? We have two tests that is being held in the experiment. Isa sa laboratory and one at the balcony. So we're going to compare the ratio of the probability of the two experiment that we have. So let's start with the first test that they have, yung nilagyan ng mark, ng letter U mark. So in the laboratory, we have the ratio which they mark the bread with letter U, which is 13/15. That's the ratio for unmarked over marked. So that's from the laboratory experiment. So 13, that is the one with marked letter U. And C15, this one is without letter U. Letter U mark from the laboratory test. And in the balcony, the result with a mark of U is 29/25. So we have 29/25. This one is with U, with letter U mark. And this one is without letter U. Okay, so that's the ratio based from the result from the laboratory and the balcony. So let's compare. What can you observe about the ratio of the result from the laboratory and from the balcony? It's more, again, Chloe, it's more what? There's more chances in the balcony according to the ratio that we have. Since we have 29/25, there's greater chance that once we throw the bread at the balcony, it will land with a U mark. So when toast is dropped from the balcony, how does the ratio of butter side to unbutter side compare to the data from the test in the lab? So we're done with the mark. So let's go with the butter side. In the laboratory, the number of a butter side, yung merong butter, is 14/14 with a butter and without butter. That is from the laboratory test. In the balcony, the result in throwing the bread with butter is 32 and without butter is 22. So kung kanina sa laboratory, merong 50% chance for butter side and for without butter side. But when it comes to the balcony, it's not 50% now because we have 32 outcomes from a butter side and 22 outcomes without butter. So what can you observe from that experiment based on the result for the laboratory and the balcony when it comes to the butter side? May influence ba yung height to the experiment for the result that we have? Since sa laboratory, Nasa mababang place lang trino yung bread. That's why we have 50% equal 14. But in the balcony, we have 32/22. Does it have an influence? May influence ba yung height? Bakit naging influence yung height? What do you think is the reason behind that height has a great impact when we throw the bread, that it will land with a butter side?
Because of the turns.
Because of the
Turns.
because of the turns. Because of the turns, kaya nabago yung probability, hindi na equal kasi mas mataas na. What else? What other reason can you guess? Why is it that it's not a 50% now when it comes to the balcony experiment? Bakit hindi pwedeng 31 and 31 na lang? Bakit naging 32 and 22? Bakit hindi siya pwedeng 50% din kay balcony? Since same lang naman yung experiment. What other reason can you guess? Mas bumibigat ba yung butter face or butter side of the bread kapag trino natin siya into higher level? Mas may chances ba na mag-land siya kasi mas mabigat siya kapag mataas yung pinanggalingan niya? Okay. Di ba you are putting some spread in your bread. You're spreading some of your like butter, like mayonnaise in your bread, right? In your sliced bread. Have you observed the texture of your bread once you are done spreading those mayonnaise or butter?
Who puts mayonnaise on bread? But yeah,
What other ano pang nilalagay niyo sa bread kung ano man yon? What is the difference on the texture once you were done spreading those things in your bread?
it is softer.
Is it softer? Alin yung mas softer? Is it at the one wherein you put the butter or the other side wherein it doesn't have a butter? Alin yung mas
It
nagiging
is the one
soft?
that you put the butter.
Yung may nilagyan ng butter,
Oh,
yung nagiging soft.
ganon.
Ganon. So if that is the case, is it also affecting the result of our experiment when it comes to that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Gabby?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So according to Gabby, it also affects. Okay. So the height and the texture of the bread is affecting the result of our experiment. Since nagiging soft yung bread, according to Gabby, kapag nilalagay ng butter or other things that you put in your bread, it will become soft. So it will affect the number of chances once you throw your bread at a higher level that it will land with a butter face. So let's try to have prediction based on that result. Using the result from the butter toast balcony experiment, what would you predict if 1,000 trials of experiment were performed? So kung kanina, we only use 54 pieces of bread and we have a number of experimental probability which is 32 na nagland with butter face. So 54 pieces of bread, we have a 32 chances or 32 outcomes from that experiment. So what will be the probability if we're going to use 1,000 bread? What will be the percentage that it will land with a butter face using the result that we have? So how are we going to answer this question? Did the question have mentioned how many outcomes is being held? Mention ba sa question kung ilang outcomes ang naging result from the 1,000? Meron bang ibang given sa problem except for 1,000? Wala na. So how are we going to identify since we only have one given, which is 1,000? So that is our given, 1,000 pieces of bread. But we need to identify what is the percentage of the probability that it will land with a butter face. So we're going to use the result that we have a while ago from the experiment with 54 pieces that has an outcome of 32 butter paste. What is the percentage of 32 to 54? How many percent is 32 of 54?
What?
Ilang percent si 32 ni 54? How many percent is 32 of 54? Ilang percent?
32% of 54?
No, how many percent si 32 ng 54? Since you have 54 pieces and you get 32, how many percent is that? From the 54 pieces, the result or the outcome of butter paste is 32. That's the result from the experiment. Okay? So that means we have the probability, experimental probability from this experiment, which is 32 over 54. So 32 over 54 in percentage is equal to what? Convert the fraction in percentage, 32 over 54 in percent.
59%.
Again, Gabby, how many percent?
59%?
59%. So we have 59% from that experiment. So if we have 59% from this experiment, what do you think will be the percentage that we will get from 1,000 pieces of bread that it will land a butter face? Nakukuha ba natin ang experimental probability from this problem? Given by yung outcome from the 1,000 pieces? Hindi. Hindi given yung 1,000 or yung outcome from the 1,000 pieces. Since you have this result from the experimental probability from the balcony, which is 59%. So that means if we have 1,000 pieces of bread, the probability will be equal to 60%. Kahit hindi mention, even though it doesn't being mentioned here, how many outcomes is being performed from our 1,000 trial or 1,000 pieces of bread. You're going to find the nearest percentage from the result of the other experiment. Okay? So kapag hindi given yung outcome, look from the first result that you have in your experiment for you to determine the experimental probability. Let's try to answer this question. So students in a science class were given a survey. They were asked how many minutes it took for them to complete an experiment. The, the data was collected and placed in a dot plot below. So here is the data according to the survey of how many minutes they're going to complete their experiment. So which statement about the dot plot are true? So looking at the dot plot that we have on the screen, which of the following statement is correct? So again, look at the result. We have the great equal number of minute is 15 and 16. That's the highest minute that the student is taking the experiment, and the lowest is 5 until 11, including 20 minutes. So which statement above the dot plot are true? Is the spread of the answer is between 5 minutes and 20 minutes. Tama ba? Five, which is correct. The data recorded is from 5 minutes until 20 minutes. The spread of the answer is between 12 minutes and 19 minutes. 12 to 19. The spread of the answer is between 5 minutes and 16 minutes. The answer are skewed to the left. The answer are skewed to the right. And the answer are neither skewed to the left or right. When we say skewed, which part of the data has a larger number? Is it at the left side or at the right side? If you're going to get the half from the data, mahatiin yung data, which side has a higher number of surveyed experiment from your experiment? So the skewed is at the left. Since mas madami yung sumagot or madami yung result on the left side. Okay, since we have 2, 5, 9, 13, 17, 22 at the left side of our dot plot. We're going to get the half of this data. This is the left side, so it's skewed to the left. Let's proceed with this one, this question. The same data, but we're going to answer this question. Okay, you're the one who's going to answer this question for 1 minute. 1 minute lang ha. One question lang to ha. Okay, I'm going to assign this in your Discover Education. Just answer this one.